The rock band ZZ Top confirms that bassist Dusty Hill has died. According to the group's official website, Hill passed away in his sleep at home in Houston. No cause of death was given. He was 72 years old. The Rolling Stones' Keith Richards inducted ZZ Top into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's class of 2004. You're listening to...
Flash floods in eastern Afghanistan have killed at least 60 people. The area is under Taliban control and negotiations are underway to allow access to rescue workers. Sikandar Kamani reports from Kabul.
The flash floods took place last night in Kamdesh district in the eastern province of Nuristan, close to the Pakistani border. Local people have recovered a number of bodies, but many others are still missing, whilst dozens of homes have been destroyed. Efforts by officials to help provide assistance have been hampered by both the fact the area is under Taliban control as well as its remote location. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the country, fighting has been continuing between government forces and the insurgents, with clashes in the cities of Lashkargah and Kandahar.
Sikandar Kamani. Palestinian officials say a 12-year-old boy has been shot dead by Israeli soldiers who fired at his family's car in the occupied West Bank. Israel says its soldiers shot at the vehicle after suspicious activity and are investigating. The boy was the second young Palestinian to be killed by the army in recent days. Tom Bateman, our Middle East correspondent, reports from Jerusalem.
12-year-old Mohammed al-Alami was in his family car with 3 brothers and sisters and their dad when Israeli troops shot 13 times at the vehicle, says the family. Mohammed was hit in the chest and died in hospital. It happened close to a military checkpoint near Hebron in the occupied West Bank and followed disputed circumstances. Israel's army says soldiers shot at the car when it failed to stop, believing it to be the same as one from which remains of a newborn baby had been discarded. But a local Palestinian official says troops had stormed a cemetery and exhumed a child's grave after burial by her family. The Israeli military says it is investigating the shooting.
Tom Bateman.
You're listening to...
Iranian state media has confirmed that a person has been killed during unrest in the west of the country, the first such fatality outside Khuzestan province, where protests against severe water shortages began last week. Sebastian Usher reports.
For more than a week, people have been taking to the streets at nightfall in towns and cities in the southwestern province of Khuzestan, chanting that they're thirsty and need water. The security forces have been mobilised against them. State media says that 4 people and a police officer have been killed, but blames the protesters. Activists say the figure is higher and that the security forces have opened fire on the demonstrations. Now, with the first death confirmed outside Khuzestan, the unrest seems to be spreading.
Sebastian Usher.
An arrest in a fatal hit-and-run crash on Interstate 87. Police say a driver cut off a motorcycle, forcing a collision, and then took off.
Tonight, technology played a big role in the arrest. CBS 2's Tony Aiello spoke with the victims' loved ones in the Bronx.
The memorial on 192nd Street is impressively large for a man who made a big impression on friends and family. They often kidded 30-year-old Michael Pereira about his love of sunflower seeds, his daily donut, and his motorcycle.
You know, he was a brother, he was a good friend, you know, he'd done a lot for a lot of people, he touched a lot of souls, especially with the bike and all, like.
Pereira was a member of the Legion of Doom motorcycle club, his Honda, his prized possession. State police say Pereira was riding southbound Monday evening on I-87 in Yonkers. Near this mile marker, the driver of a black SUV allegedly lurched across multiple lanes of traffic to reach the exit. The motorcycle slammed into the rear of the SUV. Police say the driver did not render aid or even bother to stop. State police say the SUV's rear bumper was damaged. Its rear window was shattered. There's no way that driver didn't know he was involved in an accident.
That means you have no remorse for a person, like, you know, because any person with the right state of mind, you hit a person, you get out, you check on that person. In this particular moment, you kept going, like, you gave zero tolerance of care, like.
Investigators used license plate and other data gathered at the Westchester County Police Real-Time Crime Center to arrest Cesar Zapata Ramirez, a 28-year-old Bronx man. His bond set at $10,000 for felony leaving the scene of a fatal collision.
It's a little closure, you know, but still not going to bring back my uncle. You know, all the time he was there for me. It's never going to be the same without him.
a sentiment shared by many. In Kingsbridge, the Bronx, Tony Aiello, CBS 2 News.
New at noon, a fatal hit and run involving a motorcycle is under investigation in Orange County in New York. Police say it happened as 62-year-old George R. Guy was traveling northbound on State Road 9 in the town of Highlands. They say an SUV made an illegal U-turn, causing Guy to crash into the driver's side. Guy was thrown off his motorcycle. He died at the scene. The SUV sped off.
Officials in eastern China say heavy rain and flooding has left at least 25 people dead. At least 12 people perished in a subway car in the city of Zhengzhou when water rushed through the tunnel. Forecasters say this week's rain in Henan province is the heaviest that it has been in 1,000 years. Dams and reservoirs are dangerously full, and one dam is being patched.
The authorities in Nigeria say 13 police officers have been killed and 7 others wounded in an attack by a gang in the northwestern state of Zamfara. There have been frequent attacks and abductions in the region. Chris Ewoko reports.
A statement by the governor of Zamfara State said the police personnel came under attack following an ambush staged by armed gangs. The incident occurred at a village in Bungudu local government area of the state. The police in Zamfara said that the operatives were responding to a distress call to repel bandit attacks. Zamfara has been under the grip of heightened insecurity. Armed gangs attack communities and kidnap villagers, many of them for ransom. Across Nigeria, attacks on security agents by gunmen have been on the rise.
Chris Ewoko.
Last night, 26-year-old Matthew died in a motorcycle smash.
Lost my son. He was a very special boy to me. He was no angel, but I loved him.
CCTV shows the seconds after Matt's motorbike crashed into the back of a Holden Commodore, which had just made a U-turn on Thompson's Road in Cranbourne North. The driver can be seen getting out of the car to toss the damaged bumper bar over the guardrail. Shockingly, he gets back in and runs, leaving Matt on the road. That's a disturbing image for Matt's grieving partner.
There's no words to describe the feeling of he's never coming back. Then having to explain to our 5-year-old that Daddy's not coming home.
Matt's friends say he will be remembered as a loyal and funny man who loved his stepdaughter greatly.
It hasn't hit me just yet, but it's going to hit me hard, I know it is.
Witnesses say nearby residents came out to help Matthew, but it was too late. The heartless driver had left the 26-year-old to die here alone. Detectives found and seized the Commodore more than 30 kilometres away, dumped in Lyle Street at Hastings. Today, those who loved Matt returned to the place where he died to lay flowers.
You're not giving anyone that loves Matt any closure by running.
We're live now to Maggie in Frankston. Have any charges been laid?
Peter, the man suspected of leaving a young man to die on the road has been arrested but not yet charged. He is a 30-year-old man from Tura in the state's far west. Now, this man sparked a manhunt. He was on the run for about 14 hours and he was arrested about 2 hours ago at the Frankston train station. Now, police say they were able to make this arrest after receiving information from the public about where exactly he was. And Peter, police say no charges have yet been laid.
Authorities in eastern China say 17 people were killed in Monday's collapse of a hotel. NPR's Amy Chang says a half dozen people survived the collapse.
Among the 6 survivors, 5 were taken to nearby hospitals for treatment. A hotel guest who checked out hours before the collapse told Chinese media that the hotel basement was undergoing construction throughout his stay. A preliminary investigation indicated that the owner of the hotel tried to alter the building's layout, which likely triggered structural instability that led to the incident. The country's highest governing body, the State Council, has dispatched a team to Jiangsu for a follow-up inquiry. Amy Chang, NPR News, Beijing.
It's NPR.
Violent unrest and looting continue in some parts of South Africa. This began after former President Jacob Zuma was imprisoned for his conviction of contempt of court. Now the unrest has turned deadly with at least 27 deaths. Some people have been killed in sudden stampedes at shopping malls where looting is occurring. The South African government has deployed police officers and the military to try to stop the unrest. Some major roads are blocked. Officials in Iraq report at least 64 people have been killed in a hospital fire in the southern part of that country. The victims were in a COVID-19 ward. Initial Iraqi reports suggest the fire was ignited by an exploding oxygen cylinder that was in one of the small outside cabins used as an isolation ward. I'm Corva.
The leader of a ruthless Libyan militia responsible for mass killings is reported to have been shot dead in the eastern city of Benghazi. It's not yet clear who killed Mohammed al-Khani or why. Here's our Middle East analyst, Alan Johnston.
There are conflicting reports as to how Mohammed al-Khani died. One account said he was killed during an attempt to arrest him. Another said gunmen stormed his home. Al-Khani headed a gang of brothers whose militia imposed a reign of terror on the small town of Tahuna. They were allies of the warlord General Khalifa Haftar, and when his attempt to capture western Libya failed, the Al-Khanis were forced to retreat from their stronghold. They left behind 27 mass graves. Among the bodies were the remains of women and children.
Alan Johnston.
Michael Bristow. We're following in New Zealand. Tourists visited an active volcano, some walking right into the crater. Many of them never made it out. Take a look at these dramatic images. Imagine the terror and chaos of having to race onto a boat and escape for your life. The volcano on White Island erupted several times while the tourists were there. 5 people are confirmed dead. 8 people are still missing. There doesn't appear to be much hope of finding them alive. Rescuers aren't even able to get near the island right now because it's too dangerous. The Prime Minister of New Zealand spoke a short time ago.
Consensus here is that the focus has to be on those at this time who are critically injured and, of course, what is very sadly a recovery operation. Of those questions that people undoubtedly will have, the context would simply provide is that my understanding is that tourism operations have been undertaken there for several decades, up to 30 years. It has been a live volcano throughout that time. At various times has been at level 2. But it is a very unpredictable volcano. There will be questions that will be asked and do need to be answered by the appropriate authorities, and we will be ensuring that that happens. But for now, we're focused on those who are caught up in this horrific event.
Well, meteorologist Tom Sater joins me now with more. So the Prime Minister of New Zealand said this is an active volcano. So how risky was it to actually be on that island? Because if it had been a tourist destination for that long, people have been visiting that place for a while now.
Yeah, tourist companies, we believe, take about 10,000 tourists to the volcano every year. But we're going to go through some of the questions they're going to be asking that the Prime Minister is bringing up. 48 kilometers off the coast of the North Island, the Bay of Plenty. This volcano, 70% of it is underwater, making it the largest volcano in all of New Zealand. But you can see where past eruptions have, kind of collapsed side of this, what we call a cone volcano. You just never know with these things, even though they're tremors have been picked up in the last week. Himawari satellite imagery actually will show the plume here picking up, getting up to about 12,000 feet in elevation. But here are the questions. We found a report that was issued just 1 week ago. And it comes from GeoNet, of course, of New Zealand, monitoring the situation. And it states, moderate volcanic unrest continues. Substantial gas, steam, mud bursts, and in fact goes on to say mud bursts 20 to 30 meters in the air. This activity has been present since late September, becoming more frequent. Maybe entering a period where eruptive activity is more likely than normal. So that begs the question, why allow the tourists to get there to begin with? Now, at one time, briefly, we're at 3, a minor eruption. It did jump to a 4 during that activity, but it's back down. And I know everyone's trying to keep up hope for any survivors, but this toxic gas in the smoke plumes is just so high in intensity. Not to mention, of course, the temperatures, the water on there is acidic, probably boiling. I mean, we're trying to keep all hope out, but no one knows if it'll erupt again. You just have to hope that all that energy trapped underneath has been released. Wave heights for rescuers, 1 to 5 meters, so they're going to be battling some winds, I think, the next 24 hours.
The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has expressed his condolences to the families of at least 16 people killed in lightning strikes over the weekend. They were trying to take selfies on top of a fort in the state of Rajasthan. Over the past 24 hours, storms have reportedly killed 50 people in Rajasthan and neighbouring Uttar Pradesh. Lindsay Brown reports.
This video posted on social media shows heavy rain and lightning in Rajasthan. 27 people were on Jaipur's 12th century Amber Fort, a popular tourist attraction, when the lightning struck on Sunday. A senior police officer said most of those who died were young. Authorities say deaths by lightning strike have doubled in India since the 1960s, citing the climate crisis as a possible cause. Helen Willits is from the BBC Weather Centre.
It's not unusual to have deaths from lightning strikes in India. In fact, some 2,000 people are known to lose their lives most years during the monsoon season, compared with 30 in the US and around 3 in the UK. And that's for a variety of reasons. There are state-of-the-art warnings across the UK and the USA, but also the monsoon rains are concentrated from June to September. So that's when most of the rain falls across India. And when it comes, it's torrential, and it comes in large swathes as well. So you can have thunderstorms for miles.
The Indian Meteorological Department has warned of more lightning over the next 2 days.
Lightning strikes can cause serious injuries or even death.
And the government's put out this video on how to help someone who may have been struck by lightning.
It is safe to touch the victim. The body does not retain an electrical charge. Giving first aid while waiting for professional medical attention can save the victim's life.
Authorities have offered around $7,000 to each of the bereaved families.
That was Lindsay Brown.
Rabbi turned comedian Jackie Mason has died. He started his Borscht Belt routine at summer resorts in the Catskills in the 1950s, and by the early 60s he was a star on TV and later Broadway. Mason was 93.
Wyalla's Debbie and Dwayne T, a mother and son, a grandmother and a father who've lost their lives on the Augusta Highway when their silver four-wheel drive slammed into a tree.
My understanding is that they left Whyalla to go to Port Pirie to pick up a birthday present, tragically.
Two of Dwayne's sons were in the car. Both were airlifted to Adelaide last night, the eldest clinging to life.
You've got an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old that now have the prospect of going through the rest of their lives without their father and without their grandmother, and that's very sad.
This morning, flowers at the bottom of what's now a roadside memorial just north of Baruta. Tributes have appeared online from heartbroken and shattered loved ones. Dwayne's devastated former colleagues struggling to process his loss.
Like I say, we're all shocked. No, he was a very family-orientated man. So, yeah, it's pretty devastating news, really.
His mum, Debbie, remembered as bubbly and someone who loved life.
She was very lively, always fun and energetic. Always give a laugh whenever she was here.
Terrible, tragic thing that just came out of nowhere.
It's had a ripple effect across the community. Everyone has been affected in some way.
That community now rallying behind the boys. Late today, the teenager's condition improved. He's still serious, but he will survive.
This is a long and very difficult journey that they have ahead of them and their families.
Major Crash returned to the scene this morning, taking more pictures. Officers are trying to understand how the car with the trailer left the roadway. Given the accident occurred in the afternoon, Major Crash detectives believe there could be witnesses and are urging anyone with information to come forward. The state's road toll now sits at 60, 5 more than this time last year. Mike Lorrigan, 9 News.
Rescue crews worked through the early morning hours and all day today, searching for survivors of a partial building collapse near Miami. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis toured the scene of the 12-story condominium in Surfside, and then he spoke to the media.
Right now, we have the fire rescue. They are in search and rescue mode. They are trying to identify survivors. I know they have made contact with some, and they are doing everything they can to save lives.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this Friday night. We're going to begin tonight with the worldwide outpouring of grief over the death of Britain's Prince Philip, and perhaps the most dramatic change in the British monarchy since World War II. Flags across the United Kingdom are at half-staff tonight in memory of the 99-year-old husband of Queen Elizabeth, who died at Windsor Castle earlier today. With the exception of his wife, no one played a more important role in shaping the British crown over the past 7 decades than the Duke of Edinburgh, who worked to modernize the monarchy, all while trying to hold his family, the royal family, together during decades of scandals and palace intrigue, from the death of Princess Diana to Harry and Meghan's recent bombshell interview with Oprah. And while he was the father, grandfather, and great-grandfather to future kings, he could never hold the title himself. Instead, he walked and lived in the Queen's shadow. His job, he once said, was first, second, and last, never to let her down. We've got 2 reports tonight on Prince Philip's life legacy and the seismic shift his death is causing tonight across the United Kingdom. CBS's Charlie D'Agata is going to lead off our coverage tonight from outside of Windsor Castle. Good evening, Charlie.
Good evening, Nora. Well, here at Windsor Castle, they've been defying COVID restrictions in order to pay tribute. They've been laying flowers and in some cases just standing silent in order to say goodbye. First came the official statement posted on palace gates. With deep sorrow, the Queen announces the death of her dear husband. Then rows of flowers and tributes.
We felt really sad, unbelievably.
After being released from the hospital on March 16th, he came home to Windsor Castle. However, unlikely the hope of a recovery. A nation mourns his passing. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the country's thoughts must now turn to the Queen and family.
Because they have lost not just a much-loved and highly respected public figure, but a devoted husband and a proud and loving father, grandfather, and, in recent years, great-grandfather.
President Joe Biden paid condolences for an extraordinary life.
99 years old, he never slowed down at all, and which I admire the devil out of.
Married to the Queen for 73 years, no other consort has come close to serving beside a British sovereign for so long. A sense of duty the Duke of Edinburgh took seriously, says royal commentator Wesley Kerr.
There was a huge roster of duties. This is a man that chalked up 22,000 engagements. He would often do 3 or 4 engagements a day.
As the family's thoughts turn to funeral arrangements in the middle of pandemic social restrictions, we understand Prince Charles traveled to Windsor this afternoon to see his mother. Today, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle paid tribute to Philip on the website of their foundation, replacing its homepage with a memorial in loving memory of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. Thank you for your service. You will be greatly missed.
And Charlie is back with us. And what do we know about the royal family's plans?
Well, royal family sources tell us that Prince Philip will lie here in rest while the family mourns in private. Prince Harry is expected, though not confirmed, to attend. As for Meghan, her doctors will depend on her doctor's approval, with her baby due sometime around June. Nora?
All right, Charlie D'Agata, thank you.
One person is confirmed dead, but Miami-Dade's police director says nearly 100 people are still unaccounted for. NPR's Greg Allen joins us now from Surfside. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Elsa.
So what happened exactly?
Well, it's around 1:30 in the morning. This 12-story condominium building in Surfside, just north of Miami Beach, collapsed. Just inexplicably, without any kind of warning. A surveillance video captured the collapse, and what it shows is horrifying. It happened when people were asleep. They had no warning. It just came down, and this is part of a condominium complex called the Champlain Towers. Surfside Mayor Charles Burkett went out to the scene by 2 a.m., says he was shocked by what he saw when he arrived there.
We've got 134 units in that building, I understand, and literally half of that building is not there anymore.
Now, this is a 40-year-old building. Officials say they believe that 55 apartment units in the building collapsed in total.
Incredible. And how are search and rescue efforts going at this point?
Well, it's been a very difficult situation, officials say. You know, the 12 floors in this one section of the condominium just pancaked, just went flat. And rescue crews have been on the scene since overnight, using dogs, going carefully through the rubble, also high-tech listening devices, sonar devices, listening for sounds. They didn't get any sounds from on top of the rubble. They went in underneath and are hearing some things. But here's Miami-Dade County Assistant Fire Rescue Chief Ray Jadala.
The northeast corridor of the apartment had collapsed. Our units began search and rescue efforts. They pulled 35 occupants that were trapped inside the building.
They did get 2 people from the rubble earlier today, but since then there's been very little success. They've now been working in the parking garage and underneath, beginning to tunnel into the rubble. But this is a slow process, they say, with the rubble shifting, dust rains down the rescuers. A fire started at one point, so they have to go really slowly. And they say they have heard some sounds coming from the rubble, but so far nothing since those 2 people from this morning.
Well, were a lot of people able to get out on their own?
Right. Well, when this came down, people in the adjoining building, their building was damaged badly as well. A lot of those people heard the rumbling and rushed to safety. Rescue crews got 35 people out of that structure that was damaged. 63-year-old Barry Cohen was one of the people who was rescued.
I was in a deep sleep, and I heard what I thought was a crash of lightning, but the crashing noise didn't stop. And it just kept going and going and going for, I'd say, 20, 30 seconds.
Cohen and his wife rushed downstairs, but then he says they couldn't get out through the emergency door. They went down to the basement, which was flooding from broken pipes. So then they went back up to their apartment, where crews were able to rescue them from their balcony.
It's absolutely horrifying. What do we know at this point about what may have caused a collapse like this?
Officials say that they don't really know at this point. It's kind of early. That'll be the focus of an investigation by Miami-Dade County's police department. But right now they're focused on the ongoing search and rescue mission and helping the people who are left homeless. And they've also evacuated people from the adjacent buildings as a precautionary measure in the meantime.
That is NPR's Greg Allen in Surfside, Florida. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
The Utah Highway Patrol says 7 people were killed in a series of crashes Sunday afternoon on Interstate 15. About 20 cars piled up after they were struck by a dust or sandstorm that blew up suddenly. Several people were taken to the hospital in critical condition. The site of the accident is about 160 miles south of Salt Lake City.
At least one person has been killed, and as we record this podcast, 4 remain missing after an explosion at a chemical plant in western Germany. Officials from the city of Leverkusen say that 16 people were injured by the blast at the local industrial park. A fire which broke out at the site, where dozens of chemical companies have plants, has now been extinguished. Damien McGuinness reports from Berlin.
The explosion happened at around 9:30 Tuesday morning at an industrial park for chemical companies in the German city of Leverkusen near Cologne. The blast sent large clouds of thick black smoke into the air. German officials are calling it an extreme threat and are asking local people to stay inside and keep doors and windows shut. Several large motorways nearby have been closed, and police are calling on people to avoid the region to keep roads free for emergency vehicles.
Damien McGuinness in Germany.
The FBI is taking the lead in the investigation into a violent incident near the Pentagon today that left 1 police officer dead. The building's no longer under lockdown. NPR's Joel Rose has the latest.
A law enforcement official tells NPR that the officer was killed in an incident at a transit center in Virginia near the Pentagon. Pentagon police have not confirmed that, but Senator Mark Warner of Virginia said on Twitter that a Pentagon police officer was killed in a senseless act of violence and offered his condolences to the officer's family. Authorities have released few details about the incident. The chief of the Pentagon Police confirmed that a Pentagon police officer was attacked on a bus platform at 10:37 a.m. local time. Gunfire was exchanged, he said, and there were several casualties. The scene is secure, he said, but the investigation continues. Joel Rose, NPR News, Washington.
We begin in Germany, where sirens rang out as torrents of water started gushing through towns and cities in the west of the country. At least 58 people are now reported to have died, with dozens more missing. Cars are floating down flooded streets, and there are fears that a large dam not far from the old capital, Bonn, may burst. This resident near Trier said he had never seen such destruction.
Catastrophic. I've been waiting for my daughter and my wife who were out and about. My daughter was on her way back from Trier. I was unable to reach them. Everything was down. I myself live up there. I wasn't affected. But the people down here, oh dear, having seen how the water washed through here with tractors, gas cylinders, it's simply catastrophic.
The normally calm and assured German Chancellor Angela Merkel sounded upset on Thursday.
Friedliche Orte durchleben in diesen Stunden eine Katastrophe.
Peaceful towns are living through a catastrophe. You could say a tragedy. I'm deeply shocked by the reports I'm getting from towns which are totally submerged, where people in dire need have fled onto the roofs of their houses to save themselves. I'm grieving for those who lost their lives in this disaster. We don't know the exact number yet, but it will be many, and my deepest sympathies go to their loved ones.
Ihren Angehörigen gilt meine tief empfundene Anteilnahme.
I heard from our correspondent Jenny Hill, who's in a flooded area in western Germany.
It's been an absolutely devastating 24 hours for not just this part of Germany, but other parts of Europe too, of course. I'm stood on the banks of the River Ahr. It's really fast flowing. You can probably hear it. It's really swollen. People here say round about this time yesterday, the waters just suddenly rose up, almost, they say, without warning, and rushed through the little towns and villages that dot the countryside here to devastating effect. I spent quite a lot of time in the little village of Schult today. It's like something from a disaster movie, you know, where once there was a small, quaint village street, there's just a pile of rubble, crushed household appliances, tiles, stones, bits of clothing. People's houses have been completely destroyed. 6 houses actually swept away. 4 dead in that village alone, many more missing across this region. These are the worst floods in living memory.
Germany is a country which likes to prepare itself for all eventualities, be that extreme temperatures or extreme flooding. But it was struck by this, and we were all struck by seeing Angela Merkel quite emotional when she was speaking a few hours ago.
Yes, I think for her it will hurt that she is out of the country. She, of course, is visiting Washington at the moment at a time of such a horror, really. And the people we've spoken to here are in genuine shock. I can't tell you the number of people I've spoken to today who are just wandering around in a daze. One woman I met in that village of Schult had just returned. They fled last night. You know, she said a fireman got us out at the very last minute. Her son's in hospital, but he's okay. But she'd come back to look at the village, and, you know, her face as she took in this complete scene of destruction was quite something. You know, she just looked at where her house was, and half of it had gone. You could see right through into the house. And, you know, people are understandably extremely upset, but they're also really taken aback. A lot of them saying to us, you know, this happened almost without warning. One minute there was a bit of light rain. The next, you know, our town was underwater and we were on the roof of our house, you know, needing to be rescued, winched to safety. So I think you can understand just how shocked people are, and how difficult Angela Merkel will find it to be so far away. It's probably worth pointing out a lot of people, of course, are asking, you know, is this the effect of climate change? And Armin Laschet, who's the Prime Minister of North Rhine-Westphalia, one of the areas badly affected, and potentially a successor to Angela Merkel as German Chancellor, depending on what happens in September's election, has already said today, you know, this is climate change, and we all of us, Europe, the world, need to do better to counter its effects.
Jenny Hill, close to the town of Schult in western Germany. And several of Germany's neighbouring countries have also been badly affected by flooding. The mayor of one of Belgium's main cities, Liège, has asked people living in areas at risk of flooding from the River Meuse to evacuate or move to upper floors of their buildings if they cannot leave. Our correspondent in Brussels, Nick Beek, gave the latest to my colleague Matthew Amroli-Walla.
We've seen this record rainfall cause a number of major rivers across Europe to burst their banks. You talk about Liège specifically. We've just seen some video of a police car crawling through the very wet streets there, giving this emergency message saying people should leave their homes if they can. And if they can't, if they've got an upper floor, if they've got a first, second, third floor, they should go to higher ground. And the concern there is that the River Meuse is potentially set to raise more 1.5 metres in the coming hours. So with that is a fear that a nearby dam could collapse. So that is why Belgium's third biggest urban area is being evacuated, or certainly people are being asked to leave. We can hear the sirens in the background here in Brussels, flooding here too in the capital.
So Nick, just give me an idea of across the country, because we're watching there in Germany, they've got rescue efforts, they've got huge pressure on the authorities. I assume it's exactly the same in Belgium.
It is, because if you look at the geography, this is focused on an area really where three countries meet. So the most western part of Germany, the most southern tip of the Netherlands, and then to the east of Belgium. So yes, they may be separated by borders, but you've got emergency services that have swung into action and really are facing some very difficult operations. In one particular place, Verviers, we saw a woman filmed from her window in amazement as cars simply just were taken down what would have been the high street, this very thick brown water, a torrent carrying vehicles away. And we know in that particular place, 4 people have died. Also further north in the Netherlands, care homes have been evacuated. And so it is a real concern for lots and lots of different people. And the emergency services are doing all they can in what clearly are really difficult circumstances. And as we've been hearing, the rain is set to continue.
Nick Peake in Brussels.
The news agency Reuters says one of its photojournalists was killed while covering a clash between Afghan forces and Taliban fighters. NPR's Dia Hadid has more.
Reuters said that photojournalist Danish Siddiqui was killed in a Taliban crossfire. That was according to an Afghan commander who spoke to the news organisation. Siddiqui had been embedded with Afghan special forces for days. They had been fighting to retake a market in the southern area of Spin Boldak. The Taliban had recently overrun the area where there's a border crossing with Pakistan. Siddiqui was part of a Reuters team that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2018 for documenting the Rohingya refugee crisis. The Reuters president and its editor-in-chief said in a statement that Siddiqui was an outstanding photographer and a devoted husband and father. Dia Hadid, NPR News.
Officials in Mali say a man who tried to attack the country's transitional president last week has died while hospitalized in government custody. They say they're now investigating. Colonel Assima Goïta was unharmed when the suspect attempted to stab him during a public ceremony in Mali's capital on July 20th. Before becoming transitional president, Goïta staged 2 coups in under a year. The military leader has pledged to return Mali to civilian rule. Elections are scheduled for next February.
Today in Bangladesh, these were the scenes at the site of a factory near the capital, Dhaka. A massive fire broke out in a food processing plant, and as we recorded this podcast, at least 52 people were known to have died. Distraught relatives waited outside the ruins as firefighters brought out bodies. Some workers, trapped by the flames, were forced to jump from the upper floors of the building, and it's feared that with many still unaccounted for, the true number of dead may be much higher. From Dhaka, Akbar Hussain told me more.
Bangladeshi firefighters are still searching dead bodies inside the factory because this is a huge factory which employs more than 7,000 workers. And when the fire broke out yesterday evening, in one of the buildings in the factory compound, in that particular building where fire broke out, I came to know that from the official that there are at least 1,000 workers are working at that time. So it is believed that many people are still trapped inside. So the firefighters, they have just entered the building in search of dead bodies or to find out someone who is still survived.
And why did the fire burn for so long? Why was it so fierce?
It was a huge fire because the factory was huge. It is a food processing factory. And as I told you that many workers are working there. And I was talking to Bangladeshi fire department officials. Then they told us that the factory design is very faulty and the fire safety measures were not taken appropriately to check any fire incident. And when fire broke out, the main gate of the factory was closed because of security reasons. That's why the workers, they couldn't come out of the factory when the fire broke out in the whole area. That's why so many people died. That is exactly what the fire department told us.
And it seems incredible that this is the case because we've had previous fires like this in factories in Bangladesh where, again, gates or doors have been locked, preventing workers from escaping. So why are the authorities not learning the lessons from these fires and stopping this happening again?
You know that the fire safety is such a thing which is mostly ignored in Bangladesh. And Bangladeshi factory owners, they have a tendency not to give any importance to the fire safety measures. We have seen a lot of fire incidents in the last 1 decade in the garment factories. And in the garment factories, the situation has improved. But in the other factories where the safety standard is not properly monitored and government is not giving proper attention to improve the safety standards, that is exactly why things are happening repeatedly.
Akbar Hussain speaking to me from Dhaka.
Iraqi security sources say at least 25 people have been killed in a bomb attack in the capital Baghdad. The strike in the mainly Shia Muslim area comes after weeks of relative calm in Iraq. Our Middle East analyst Alan Johnston reports.
According to security sources, this bomb was a locally made device. It exploded in a busy market in the Sadr city district, a mainly Shia Muslim area. Women and children were among the dead, and some shops were set on fire. It's not yet known who was behind the blast, but suspicion will fall on militants of the Islamic State group. They've carried out many bombings in Baghdad, but the city has been largely spared such attacks in recent months.
That was Alan Johnston.
Police are investigating a mass shooting in Chicago's Lincoln Park last night. They say 8 people were riding on a party bus were injured in a drive-by shooting. That was one of several shootings in Chicago that killed at least 3 people, including a 14-year-old boy, on Wednesday.
More than 100 people have died in the western Indian state of Maharashtra in landslides and flooding triggered by torrential monsoon rains in the past few days. In the worst incident, 36 bodies were pulled from a landslide in a village in the district of Raigad. The Indian military has been helping the rescue work. From Delhi, Anbarasan Etirajan reports.
Officials in India's Maharashtra state say it's the heaviest downpour in July in 40 years. Emergency services are battling inclement weather and time to rescue dozens of people still trapped in landslides in the district of Raigad. The number of casualties is likely to increase. In many places, roads have been cut off, bridges and mobile phone towers have collapsed, bringing communication to a standstill. Hundreds of villages and towns are without electricity and drinking water. Several rivers were flooded after the authorities released water from dams filled by the unprecedented rains. Weather forecasters have issued red alert to many districts. Seasonal monsoon rains from June to September caused deaths and mass displacement across South Asia.
Anbarasan Etirajan.
The Associated Press is reporting that a suspect behind a violent incident outside the Pentagon today was shot by police and died at the scene. Pentagon officials declined to offer details other than to say the incident was over and that the public is at no risk. The investigation is still underway and the FBI is taking the lead.
Dean, 2 teenagers were killed following a single-car crash in Mission Bay Park. This afternoon, families and friends of the teens are gathering at the crash site. NBC7's Melissa Don is live along SeaWorld Drive to share what we've learned from witnesses. Melissa?
Monica, it's just a devastating crash that killed 2 19-year-olds. And what we've seen throughout the afternoon is that right behind me across the street, there is now a growing memorial with several friends and families that have come to this site to pay their respects and see the last spot where their loved ones was when this crash happened. Now, it's been a tough situation. I've actually spoken to some of the witnesses who tell me that right now they're just holding off on sharing more about those victims because they're still working to notify family from out of state. We do have video of the crash that this just happened last night, and this crash is just difficult to process because you can imagine for some of the friends, they were driving in separate cars when they witnessed their own friend's pickup truck crash. This happened around 9:30 last night here near SeaWorld. Police say the 19-year-old driver was speeding in those moments when he lost control and he slammed into a light pole and then a street light. Officers say 2 people were inside the truck. It was a 19-year-old boy and a 19-year-old girl. But first responders say the truck was so badly mangled that at first they thought there were maybe others inside. This afternoon, we've seen dozens of friends and families come out to the crash site. There is now this memorial up. We've seen some photos, flowers to honor the victims. But at this point, we are not sharing the names of the two that we have learned that were involved in this crash out of respect to the family. But some of the friends that I spoke to here on site tell me they're a tight-knit group. A lot of them say we're all best friends, and also coming to mind the ages of them. They're ranging from 18 to about 21 years old. So tight-knit group of young people just trying to figure out and process this awful, awful crash. Reporting live in Mission Bay, I'm Melissa Don, NBC7.
Yeah, it sure is super sad. Okay, thank you, Melissa.
We're following tragic news out of Italy. On Sunday morning, a cable car carrying 15 passengers plummeted down a mountainside on the banks of Lake Maggiore in northern Italy. Almost all of the passengers died immediately at the accident. Now, this accident happened just as the cable car was about to reach its final destination, 1,491 meters above the lake. They were trying to reach a panoramic outlook area overlooking this very popular lake in the north of the country. Rescue workers had to be airlifted down or travel on foot in order to reach the wreckage site, which was inaccessible by road. Barbie Lazzanedo, CNN, Rome.
We were woken about 11:15 last Wednesday night to the sound of another car through the fence. When I arrived out here, within a couple of minutes, I found a young man deceased behind the wheel, badly injured, head injuries, which the amount of blood will stick with me for the rest of my life. We didn't sleep for Wednesday or Thursday night because of the visual sight of him being behind the wheel, still strapped in, and no signs of life. We will never forget that. I can't, mate. We've had 9 crashes in the 12 years we've lived here, major crashes through our fences. This is the first fatality. There was only one other injury, major injury accident, and we feel that it's time something should be done about the corner. We've had discussions with the council, with the local council, who have been receptive to our ideas, but the budget doesn't allow. We and the neighbours agree that an Armco barrier would probably be the safest way around this corner to save the fence and perhaps another fatality.
The National Weather Service confirms today several tornadoes touched down in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin yesterday. The storms also caused flooding and downed trees and power lines. They resulted in at least 1 death, injured several people, and left a trail of damage to homes and businesses. The United Nations mission in Afghanistan says its compound in Herat came under attack today. An Afghan guard was killed and others were wounded. NPR's Michelle Kellerman has the latest.
The UN Special Envoy for Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons, calls the attack deplorable and says it could amount to a war crime. The UN is in Afghanistan to promote peace and to oversee humanitarian assistance. Officials say they're trying to get a clearer picture of what happened at the facility in Herat. There was fighting in the area between the Taliban and the Afghan government. The UN statement blames anti-government forces for the rocket-propelled grenades and gunfire at the entrance of the, quote, clearly marked UN facility. UN personnel were not harmed. The UN is thanking Afghan police for defending the compound. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Washington.
A British father and son have died while attempting to hike a snow-covered trail on Mont Blanc near the French town of Chamonix. Peter Saunders and his son Charlie took the chairlift to the foot of the Bossons Glacier. They then attempted to traverse an area of the trail known as La Jonction, which was covered in fresh snow over the weekend. Somewhere on La Jonction, Charlie Saunders slipped and fell. His father called emergency services for help, but their call was cut out before they got his location. Rescue workers say that neither Peter nor Charlie Saunders were wearing appropriate equipment for hiking in such severe conditions.
A man who spent 2 nights trapped alone in his car over Christmas is pleading for drivers to be more careful. 2 more deaths today have taken this year's holiday road toll to double what it was last year. Madison Reedy reports.
Greg Shaw is lucky to be alive, recovering in hospital with just minor injuries.
Some cracked ribs and a little bit of bruising.
He was driving through the Waiaweka Gorge near Gisborne on Christmas morning when his car spun out and landed in a 5-metre deep ditch.
Did a 360. I remember hitting the deck, and the car hitting the deck and slamming down.
He was trapped alone for 2 long nights, using a gazebo he had in the car as a blanket to stay warm.
You're just kind of hoping that people are going to come by and see you. So you just keep on yelling.
His family and police searched for him from the air and on foot. Then, a miracle.
I saw the number plate on the car and recognised it as his. And I couldn't see him in the driver's seat, and I was just like, Greg! And he's like, oh, bloody God. Bloody, thank God.
But an incredible survival story like Greg's is rare. Our holiday road toll is already at 8. That's double last year's. 1 person died in a crash between a car and a tanker in Dairy Flat north of Auckland this morning. And another was killed earlier today in a 2-car crash in Pahiatua near Palmerston North. Yesterday in Southland, 2 people died in a collision between a milk tanker and a motorcycle. On Boxing Day, 2 died in a crash in West Auckland. And on Christmas, 2 were killed when their car hit a power pole south of Auckland.
I know we talk numbers, but that's not what it's about. It's about someone has died on the road and they're not going home.
Police are pleading for motorists to be patient as thousands leave home for New Year celebrations.
We're really concerned and, we're pleading to motorists just to heed those warnings.
Because as Greg Shaw and his family know all too well, getting there safely is all that matters. Madison Reedy, News Hub.
And just now, emergency services are responding to a serious crash on State Highway 1 in Wellsford. The crash between a truck and a car was reported at about 5:10. 1 person is seriously injured and 3 others have moderate injuries.
U.S. Navy explosive experts believe a drone strike was behind this week's attack on an oil tanker in the Arabian Sea. It's the first known fatal attack on commercial shipping in the region. 2 crew members from the UK and Romania were killed in Thursday's strike off the coast of Oman. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack on the Liberian-flagged tanker. Israel is blaming Iran. I'm Amy Held in Washington.
Good morning. To introduce myself, I'm Inspector Daryl Sweeney, the Acting Southern District Commander. I'm here to provide information about the circumstances of the fatal police shooting overnight in Kura. First, I'd like to offer my condolences to the family affected. We've been in contact with them already and I'll be seeing them later today. The outcome today, I'll be clear, is something no police officer wants to see in the course of their duties. Around 9:05 p.m. last night, police were called to an address at Freiburg Ave, Kura, to a report that a man had made threats of suicide. About the same time we received information that that man, aged in his 60s, had access to a firearm. Local police unit was dispatched and attending officers were armed as a routine precaution. The man was located with a firearm inside the Freiburg Avenue address around 10:50 p.m. At this point, officers were outside the property and able to speak briefly with the man. In behind that, back in Dunedin, they had activated the Armed Defenders Squad and a police negotiation team who arrived here at the station. However, unfortunately, 11:50 p.m, the man confronted the police at the address. He was armed with a firearm and he was shot once. No police staff were injured, and I've spoken with the members today. The man was given immediate medical attention by our people on the ground in Kura. A helicopter was called and he was medevaced to Dunedin Hospital. Unfortunately, in the early hours of the morning, he died. Police are liaising with the family of the deceased and victim support has been offered, and also full support to our people. Just be really clear that a fatal shooting is an outcome that nobody in the police wants, and nor in the community. But unfortunately, this event escalated in front of our people. It can have significant long-lasting effects on all of those involved. The circumstances of this incident are now subject of investigations. A critical event investigation is underway and we have detectives in Oamaru at the moment. The IPCA have been informed and will commence their own independent investigation, and the death will be referred to the coroner.
Thousands of people have fled tourist areas in Turkey after wildfires threatened hotels and villages along the southern coast. So far, 8 people have died and hundreds have been given hospital treatment. Errol Parlak, who lives in the resort of Marmaris, says people were caught out by the speed of the flames.
Yangın başladığında 400 metre geriden.
The fire started 400 meters from here and it took only 5 minutes to reach us. Everybody here was crying and screaming for help. We haven't slept in 3 days.
Turkey recorded its highest ever temperature in July. Fires are also affecting parts of Greece and Lebanon. Ezra Yalchinap is a BBC video journalist based in Istanbul.
It's now the 5th day in the series of fires that Turkey has seen to the largest extent in its history. Firefighters are trying to put out the flames both on land and also in air through helicopters and through planes that were given by Russia, Ukraine and Azerbaijan. More than 100 fires have been going on in 32 cities. However, 5 or 6 of them are still going on in Antalya, in Bodrum, in Marmaris. And it is affecting the tourism industry in a very bad way. Hotels have been evacuated, people have left their summer houses, whole villages have completely burned down. I've talked to a couple last night and I've been in contact since. They have evacuated their summer house and were waiting on shore for the officials to provide them with boats so that they can evacuate the shore because the fire kept coming towards them. So they get on the boat and were spending the night in another place. So not many optimistic stories are coming from the region. The fire is still strong. The wind and the weather conditions are not helping at all. The weather forecast is dry for the week until at least Friday. So we are following the news.
Ezra Yalchinap in Istanbul.
In the years since the contested election in Belarus, many opposition protesters have been beaten, persecuted or imprisoned. Given the chance, many have fled for the safety of neighbouring countries. But how safe are these refugees now? That's a question being asked after Vitaly Shishov, an exiled activist, was found hanged in a park in Ukraine's capital, Kiev. The exiled group he worked for, Belarusian House, blamed the Belarus authorities. Well, a spokesman for that house, Yuri Shushko, said the organisation had received warnings that exiles were under threat from what he called Belarusian state-sponsored killers.
Ukrainian security service officers had warned us privately that a network of KGB agents was active in Ukraine and that it was growing. Vitaly was in charge of our counterintelligence in a private sort of way, and he knew that we were being hunted down. Given the circumstances under which the body was found, police have told us privately that his nose had been broken. We suspect the KGB or other secret services working for Alexander Lukashenko's regime.
Yana Lushnevskaya is from BBC Monitoring in Kiev. She told me more about the reaction to Mr. Shishov's death.
The only official information we have at the moment is a statement by the Ukrainian police saying that they're investigating whether this was a suicide or a murder disguised as a suicide. But we have already heard Shishov's associates saying that they do not believe the suicide theory. So they think that he could have been targeted, for his activism and for his opposition to President Alexander Lukashenko. And we've just recently heard opposition leader who is in exile in Lithuania saying that the incident shows that Belarusians basically cannot feel safe even abroad.
So the community of exiles in Kiev is pretty large, is it, from Belarus?
It is. So many Belarusians have left the country since the crackdown on the protesters began last year. So many of them have settled in Lithuania and Poland, but many have gone to Ukraine because it's fairly easy for them to get integrated because, it's a very similar language. And so basically many ordinary people went there. And it's a very active community. They're staging protests. And as we know, this organization that Sheshov led was supporting all the many Belarusians that were coming in from Belarus.
So now there's going to be an investigation into this particular incident. Ukraine's in a difficult position. Obviously, Moscow is a key ally of Minsk. Ukraine has got many conflicts with Moscow. It doesn't want to add to them by perhaps angering Moscow over this. So it's a delicate situation, isn't it?
It is, yeah, but it will probably be a matter of, national honor for Ukraine to investigate this because the Ukrainian authorities have basically told Belarusians that they are welcome to come into Ukraine to flee all sorts of persecution and repression that they were under in Belarus. And they have been indeed very supportive of the Belarusian community in Ukraine. But, whether or not the Belarusian activists are safe in the country is, a whole different story.
And meanwhile, I imagine Belarusians will continue to come because the crackdown continues in Belarus, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. The opposition is still under a lot of pressure in Belarus. So many of them have been detained. Many have been forced into exile. So the situation is still pretty tense in Belarus.
Yana Lushnevskaya.
In Afghanistan, the Taliban have claimed responsibility for yesterday's attack on the home of the acting